Hi everyone, welcome to the July 28th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski, and this week we're looking ahead to the Saturday card at Saratoga. It's a 12-race card. We've got a couple of graded stakes in the late pick 5 sequence, including the Grade 1 Alfred G. Vanderbilt, which features last year's sprint champion and Breeders' Cup Sprint winner Elite Power. Also on this card is the Grade 2 Jim Dandy, the local prep for really the feature race of the entire Saratoga meet, the Travers, which will be run in 4 weeks' time. And I think we've got some potential major players for the Travers prepping in this Jim Dandy. Craig, like we've been seeing throughout this Saratoga meet so far, not necessarily the biggest fields in these stakes races, but we do have quality horses in the mix.
Yes, both of the graded stakes are not huge, and but 7 isn't bad in the Vanderbilt. And even though we only got 5 in the Dandy, I think that fifth horse made a very much more interesting race than it was even going to be for original that it's going to run. So we'll talk about that one, but it's hard not to say that all 5 in the Dandy wouldn't be considered contenders.
Yeah, this sequence does begin with the Alfred G. Vanderbilt, which is race 8. It goes on through an allowance event, then the Jim Dandy, and then we close things out with a allowance turf sprint, and then a marathon maiden event at the end of the card. Well, Craig, let's dive in. We already did a video preview that you can check out on Daily Racing Form's YouTube channel of the Alfred G. Vanderbilt. We went through the entire field runner by runner, but for these purposes, Craig, I think we can kind of focus in on those horses in the middle of the field because the conversation obviously centers around Elite Power and Gunite. I don't think we really have to extol the virtues of these horses. They're two of the top sprinters in the country, and Elite Power has just been on this tear recently. I mean, going back to the summer of last year, he's won 7 races in a row. He showed marked improvement throughout the latter half of last year, winning the Vosburg, the Breeders' Cup Sprint. It seemed like he got even better as a 5-year-old this season in the Riyadh Dirt Sprint in Saudi Arabia, and then returned to action in the True North with another dominant score. It's not like he's running gigantic speed figures along the way, but he just keeps winning.
Yes, and he's a horse who the last time he ran, I said I was done trying to beat him, and I'm going to stick to my guns here. Even though you could argue his speed figures might be a little light, in this field they're not all that light. Only Gunite has run faster a couple of times, but it's just the ease with which he keeps winning. It's not like he's just getting up to win by a nose. All of his wins in this streak have been by open lengths, most of them by more than just 1 and some change. There's been some with big margin. So it just seems like his rider, Irad Ortiz of late in the States, times his races. So he just is there to get the job done. And in the stretch, nobody's able really to hold him off. But I can get the argument for Gunite, who I know you made a case for on our preview. And he's certainly run fast. But in my head, I just see the Meydan race where he wasn't able to beat him and it wasn't particularly close.
Yeah, that race in Saudi Arabia where they faced off. I will say there was a ton of speed in that race back in February, and Gunite just seemed like he got a little outrun through the early stages. There was a really fast horse in there, Miras, who is kind of like a quarter-mile sprinter who just ran off to the front end, and Gunite was basically off the bridle the entire way. And I think the way that race flowed, it played much to the strengths of Elite Power and just generally the closers who were making those runs down the center of the course. And Gunite stayed on pretty gamely for second, and I thought he was also really game despite losing the Dubai Golden Shaheen in his next start. You could say, kind of going through his PPs, who has he really beaten? Because he's faced some good horses and has been right there at the end behind runners like Jack Christopher and Cody's Wish and Elite Power, but he's not really beating the champions. He still is running some speed figures, though, that are just as strong, if not in some cases stronger than Elite Power. I think one of the big questions for Gunite is what is the best distance for him? He's obviously been running 6 furlongs recently. I think he handles 6. He's probably better going slightly farther than this, but you could say the same for Elite Power, who has run some of his best races going 7 furlongs. As you go through this field, though, Craig, they're just the 2 horses to beat by far. I mean, we can talk a little bit about Dean Delivers, who does seem like he's on the upswing and is in the best form of his career by now, but he'd probably have to take yet another step forward to take down these 2 favorites. And also, Dean Delivers could have some other pace to deal with in this spot.
He does. Even though Austin Aaron is a big price on the morning line at 30 to 1, he's a horse who has shown high speed, particularly in his last couple dirt races. He's shown on front in the pace projector. Just a horse who looks like he's going to go for the front. So Dean delivers one last time wire to wire. He's won from off the pace before. He does get a good post. So I expect him to run well. I just don't think he's quite of the quality of the other two. And it would be a bit of a stretch for me to see him beating both of them. The other horse I think people might wonder about and maybe be tempted to use would be Gunnet. And it's hard to blame them when you look at the connections. Linda Rice and Jose Ortiz, they've both been on fire at Saratoga, particularly together. But for me, I just don't see it for a horse like Gunnet. I know he won his last race against a lot lesser at 6 furlongs. I think this is probably not his ideal distance, and he's just not good enough. And as I know you mentioned in our preview, as hot as Linda Rice has been, she doesn't have a lot of success in these grade one type races.
Yeah, no, she really she's business focused and she runs horses in spots where they can be effective generally, and that's usually the optional claiming races. That's her bread and butter, and taking shots in these graded stakes races, she'll do it every so often, but she doesn't have a ton of success. The stats don't really translate when you look them up into the graded stakes events for her. Just for pick five purposes, Craig, I'm not really viewing this race as a separator. It's just kind of one that I want to get through. I would probably use both Elite Power and Gunite as A's. Maybe I'll split them up and do an A and B, with Gunite being the A and Elite Power being a B. I'll see how the rest of the sequence shakes up, but it's not like I'm much for one of them and much against the other. I'm going to use them both in pretty much equal power.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement there. Even though I slightly favor Elite Power, it's not some huge edge, and I don't want to split them up as much as like an AB situation would do. They'd be more like 1 and 1A for me. So hard to separate them. Not a race I'd be interested in betting. Even in verticals, just don't see a lot of value on any of the other horses. So for me, it's just same thing. Just get through this leg.
Let's move on to a race that could be a little more of a separator. I think one where we have to make some decisions because it just looks pretty wide open. Race 9 is an N1X allowance race going the tricky distance of a mile on the inner turf with that quick run to the clubhouse turn. And we've got a field of 10 runners signed on for this race in the main body of the field. We've got an also eligible, and hopefully this race is supposed to stay on the turf. There are some MTOs in the mix that we don't really have to talk about. Craig, this is a tough race for me to make a morning line for. It just seems really wide open. I'm not exactly sure where the public is going to go, and typically in those situations they default to Chad Brown and Irad Ortiz, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people do land on the number 5 expand the map here. She's a horse, though, that I have trouble taking at any kind of short price. I will say that she had a legitimate excuse last time in that allowance race in early June at Belmont. That was a race that unfortunately featured a spill at the top of the stretch, and there were 2 Chad Brown horses in there that were affected by it and just basically got eased, expand the map being one of them. But even if I draw a line through that race, it's not like this filly has ever been the most reliable win candidate.
No, she's not reliable, but I'm taking a slightly more positive view. It's not like I'm singling her or anything like that, but it was real trouble she had last time, as you note, and the replay's unavailable. Just a pro tip: if you ever want to see races like that, you can go to the Fox channel and you on the Naira channel and watch the Fox show and find them if you really want to. I don't particularly like watching spills myself, but sometimes it can come in handy if that's something you want to see. But
I'll just jump in, Craig, and I'll say I tried to do that, and I think they took this one down because you can't even find this Fox show on YouTube. So it's just one of those replays that's been lost to the archives.
okay, well, maybe it was particularly bad. I generally don't go watch them because if I see it live, I really don't need to see it again. But I understand why some people might want to. But Expand the Map has a pretty good speed figure edge on the others in here. Some of her races 2 and 3 back are faster than what we've seen from others. So I don't want to totally dismiss her in here, but I do think there's some others that have every right to improve and are on the upswing. I'll start with one, and that's the 4-horse no-show Sammy Joe, who you have pegged as, I believe, the second choice on the morning line. Hasn't even hit the triple-digit speed figure mark yet, whereas Expand the Way is a horse who has broken 110, ran a 109. But I think this horse showed a lot breaking her maiden last time when she was able to make a pretty wide move the second half of the turn, did so mostly uncovered, and just powered away through the stretch, something that I really like to see from these turf horses. So of the others in here, she's definitely one I feel is eligible to improve and jump up her speed figure quite a bit.
Yeah, I will say, expand the map, she does have that big speed figure edge when you look at the numbers in Timeform US. I feel like a few of the races she's coming out of have numbers that are a little inflated due to all of the red that you see splashed across Expand the Map's PPs. She's been in an inordinate number of fast-paced races, and you know this, Craig, sometimes on the turf, those races that feature very fast paces, they can almost, be outliers a little bit, and especially that race won by Clitheroe 2 back. The number just came back maybe a little higher than the actual quality of those horses. Not that I'm saying that these horses don't deserve pace upgrades for running in fast-paced races, but sometimes even slightly inferior fields, the numbers can just come up a tick high, and I feel like expand the map that's been happening in a few of her races. So I don't view her as maybe having as big of an edge as it looks like when you just take the speed figures at face value. It is true, though, that no-show Sammy Joe, who feels like a horse that could take money in this race, just given her overall upside, she's coming out of slower races, and frankly, even though she won a maiden special weight last time, that was a weaker maiden special weight. It didn't feel like that was one of the stronger events that we saw at the Belmont meet. The runner-up did come back and do pretty well in her next start. I think she was involved in a photo finish next time in a competitive maiden race at Saratoga. But still, this is a big step up in class for her, and she got a pretty good trip. I mean, she was a little wide, but just had an unencumbered run to take over that race. She was superior to those horses. We'll see if she can step up here. There are some others, Craig, that will take money that I'm just not interested in. Diamond Hands, who is kind of the slower version of Expand the Map, a horse that has had plenty of chances and is just still 1 for 11 lifetime with 5 seconds. I thought she had no excuse in her last race when she was setting a pretty moderate pace, actually some slow color, blue color-coded fractions in Timeform US, and could not sustain it. To me, that's a real negative. And then on the outside, what do you do with a horse like the number 11 Spongy, who is dropping out of some stakes races, but also coming off a layoff? She's had some long breaks in her career before. She's 6 years old now. I can't always trust these horses to come back to their best form, but her best races would make her arguably the horse to beat in this spot.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of Spongy in this spot for a couple reasons. One is the post position on this inner turf course. That's a tough place to win from. I also don't like a 6-year-old mare coming off a long layoff, and you don't have to look too far back in her PPs to see a similar layoff where she came back at Saratoga last year to do similar and wasn't able to get the job done, was better, much better in her second start and winning. So I have to think probably the same MO is in play here, especially given that she drew so far outside, that this is maybe just a prep to get her ready for that next time out.
Who are you interested in here? I mean, it sounds like you do like Expand the Map a little more than I do, Craig. Is there anybody else that you've got your eye on in this spot?
Not particularly. It's a race I didn't. I totally agree with you about Diamond Hands. I don't want any parts of that one. Just no show Sammy Joe and Expand the Map are the two for me. Not exactly anything too clever. What about you? Anybody jump out at you at a bigger price?
Yeah, there are a couple other horses that I want to discuss in this race. I mean, one of them is the other Chad Brown trainee, the number 10, Get Your Kicks. And I'll say I don't love this post position going a mile on the inner turf, but at least this horse does have tactical speed, and she's actually the one shown leading on the pace projector. I guess we'll see how that plays out. The horse that's shown on the rail here, the number 2, You Gotta Have Fun, is a little bit of a wild card with regard to the pace scenario because she's making her first start on the turf here, but she has shown some speed in her prior dirt sprints. But Get Your Kicks, she was really impressive when she broke her maiden 2 back at Gulfstream Park. She was stalking an honest pace that day and took over to win with authority. Her most recent start at Belmont was pretty disappointing, just given the fact that she didn't show any progression from that maiden race, but I thought she was facing a pretty good field that day. Spansive, Juniper's Moon, Free Look, they're really good 3-year-old filly horses for an allowance race. A lot of them have been effective in stakes since then, and Get Your Kicks, she got a good stalking trip there and just couldn't really see out the distance at the end, but maybe something wasn't quite right with her because now she's been off for 2.5 months, and just given her tactical tactical speed. I generally like forwardly placed horses in these 1 mile races, and she feels like one that could get back on track here. And with Irad Ortiz going to expand the map instead, I think she's going to be a better price. And the horse that I put on top in this race that I just think is going to be the right price is the number 3, Bolivie. I know she looks a little slower than some of the other contenders. She's another 3-year-old filly, so I think she's got a little more upside than the Expand the Maps and the Diamond Hands of the world, who are 4-year-olds in this race. She obviously did not care for that synthetic surface at Turfway at all, two-back, so let's just draw a line through that race. She got on turf last time at Churchill Downs, and I liked her effort that day. I mean, it wasn't a bad trip. She saved ground most of the way, but she was just never in the clear in the stretch, and Jareth Ludbury was just trying to get her to weave through traffic all the way through the straightaway to the wire, and I mean, she had to alter course multiple times. Again, not getting stopped or really being in trouble, but I just thought she showed a lot of good courage trying to come through a few tight spots, and she was finishing really strongly at the end of that race once she found a spot on the rail and galloped out well alongside the winner, Strikingly Spun. I know it didn't come up the fastest race, but we did see Strikingly Spun come back and improve significantly next time when she stretched out at Belmont, so maybe that was a slightly better race than it seems. Another horse who finished further back in the pack also came back to improve significantly in her next start. Brendan Walsh is off to a really strong start at this Saratoga meet, and I like that she's drawn down inside, and I just think given her form, she's not one that's going to take a lot of money in this race.
I have no problems with those because outside of Expand the Map, like you said, all these horses are kind of the same speed figure wise. So when we say they need to improve, it's only improving to really beat her. And like you said, she's not the most reliable horse. Took her a while to break her maiden. She's had 3 tries at this condition. So I don't blame anyone trying to beat them. And as for Get Your Kicks, I actually like the rider change in here because I think she has some tactical speed. I'm certainly not knocking Irad Ortiz. I mean, he's the best rider probably going right now. But if there's a one that's close to him, it's probably Flavian Pratt, and he may be a little bit better in my opinion with horses that race near the front. And with this position, it does seem like he's going to need to get out of there.
Let's move on to the other stakes on this card. The Grade 2 Jim Dandy, this one for the 3-year-olds going the mile and an eighth distance. Like we were saying at the top, only 5 runners signed on, which you don't like to see, but this is not the kind of 5-horse field where there's 1 or 2 good horses and some filler. Everybody in this race has a legitimate claim to potentially win the Jim Dandy. It's a very evenly matched field, especially from a speed figure standpoint. The horse to beat, though, Craig, I think you have to consider is the number 2 Forte, and this is a tough one because he was the undisputed leader of this division earlier this year. I mean, he was obviously the 2-year-old champion last year, came back winning both of his Derby preps. It's been well documented, his turbulent Triple Crown season, being the late scratch from the Derby and then coming off the layoff in the Belmont Stakes. He was obviously, I mean, he was valiant in the Belmont. He had every right to not show up that day, and he was pretty game to nose out his stablemate Tappet Trice for second, trying to, close in on Arcangelo after having been put to a hard ride on the far turn. I thought you really saw Forte's class come through that day. But now I think we have to assess where is this horse really going for the second half of the season, and also what do you make of this move by Todd Pletcher to add blinkers for this race? I know it's something that I don't often like to see on horses that are going to be short prices.
I agree. Blinkers, I don't get it. I'm not going to question Todd Pletcher. I'm sure he has a good reason for it, but to me, it's not a great sign that maybe something isn't going the way he likes in the morning, or maybe he just wants his horse a little closer up. And I don't know, watching him run, I'm not sure that's really a good style for him. So, believe it or not, of all the 5 horses in here, he is the one that I like the least, and it has nothing to do with value. I just think this is a very tough spot. We've talked about pretty much all year how he really hasn't taken a step forward from his 2-year-old season. And even after the Belmont, I mean, it was a career top, but only by a few points. So I just don't know how much this horse has moved forward. And in addition to that, I think he's really up against it in the pace here, given the horse that I'm probably not going to be able to resist, and that's the 4-horse Saudi Crown, who was the horse I was talking about earlier, was kind of a late entrant. And I just personally think this horse is really, really talented. He was beaten by Fort Bragg in the Dwyer by just a nose, but he ran a huge speed figure that day. Actually got, I think, a point higher than the winner at a 128, which off the top of my head, that may be the best 3-year-old figure we've seen all season. And I just don't see any way anybody's challenging this horse in this race. It's just a matter if he can see out the distance. And given his breeding, I just don't see any reason he can't. Now, you could say you watched the Dwyer and he was headstrong on the front end. He went too fast and got tired. But I suspect he's going to be able to rate just fine on the front end. And I don't see how the others are going to. I mean, sure, maybe they can catch him, but it's going to be one tough task.
Yeah, I want to comment on Saudi Crown in just a minute, but first let me just circle back to Forte. The blinker change, I understand why they're doing it, just given the optics of his last two races, because we talked about it, Craig, in the Florida Derby, how he just kind of came off the bridle around the far turn, and it looked like he was spinning his wheels and going nowhere for a little bit until Irad finally got him to the far outside into the clear, and he was able to close down Mage and the rest of that field. And I thought we saw the same thing in the Belmont Stakes coming around the far turn. It looked for a brief moment like he was going backwards and going to get nothing, and then once he got him to the far outside in the stretch, he started running again and was able to get up for second. I think Todd Pletcher is trying to get him engaged for the entire race, and when you watch his training, Forte has never been the best workhorse in the morning, and when Irad is on him in the morning, he's got to ask him to really go past his workmates, so he can be a little bit lazy. The last workout on July 22nd, that's the one where he wore the blinkers, and you can watch the workout on XBTV. It was a completely different Forte in that workout. He was clearly headstrong, aggressive. He opened up a length on his workmate, was trying to pull away from the horse that he was supposed to be working alongside for the entire duration of that work. Just looked like a horse that was really keyed up and aggressive in the blinkers. And I think that's another concern that you have to have because, how horses use their speed in their races, is often determined by their running styles, and sometimes a blinker addition can just completely alter the running style of a horse, and, we're assuming Forte could be pace compromised based on the way that he's run in the past, but if this horse is really headstrong, and they're looking to get him off the pace, Irad could get in a little bit of a tugging match with this horse early, and I think that's just another concern at a short price with a horse that's never worn blinkers in a race before.
Yeah, and that's kind of, you said it better than I did, really. He's shown second on the pace projector, and a big part of that is because of that blinker change. We do move horses up when they add blinkers because statistically they do show more early speed, and I actually think that puts him in a bad spot if he's a little more aggressive early and he has to chase Saudi Crown, which is kind of how I got sidetracked there and on that talk where I don't think it's a good sign. I think they should stick with what has worked up to this point. He only lost one race to Belmont coming in off of a pretty good layoff, and he was beaten a length and a half. So it seems like maybe doing a little too much.
Yeah, and as for Saudi Crown, I really don't have much of an argument to the case that you laid out, Greg. He earned that huge speed figure last time in the Dwyer. I had some doubts about how good a horse like Fort Bragg really was after that Pat Day Mile got such a surprisingly high speed figure, but that's a number that has really held up when horses have run back out of that race. And, we saw Fort Bragg, who I think both you and I felt had run the best race in the Pat Day Mile, come back and improve in that Dwyer. So it all seems legitimate that this horse really is that fast, and he's been fast right since the start of his career. A mile and an eighth at Saratoga, it can be a big difference from a one-turn mile at Belmont. You really do need some stamina to get this trip. But in a smaller field where he's going to be controlling the pace, it is the best kind of situation for a horse like this. So I'm not discounting him. He's not going to be my top pick in this race. I prefer others, but I definitely understand the case for Saudi Crown. Brad Cox has two others in this field. And, Craig, what do we do with Angel of Empire? Because, you'll remember this is a horse that we both liked. I know that I really liked, especially going into the Arkansas Derby and coming out of that race into the Kentucky Derby. I thought he ran well in the Kentucky Derby. I agree with the general feeling that he was never winning that race. He just kind of followed Mage around the far turn and had his chance in the stretch, couldn't quite close that field down, but still ran really well. And then the Belmont last time, speaking of blinker changes, they put blinkers on this horse, and it just got him a little more engaged early, and he was sort of up on the pace. I mean, not really stalking, but just kind of sitting out there a little closer than he usually does. And when Tapit Trice made that premature move around the far turn, it kind of forced Angel of Empire to go a little bit earlier than he wanted to, challenging for that runner-up spot. And he was just kind of trying to sustain a half-mile run that was prompted by Tapit Trice, and that's really not the style that you want to see, especially going a mile and a half. And he just faded a little bit at the end of that race. He's still a horse that has really never run poorly in a dirt route. I mean, he's just keeps showing up every time. And in this race, he's going to be able to take back to last in a small field, settle a little better, and maybe he can close this field down. I actually think this is a horse that is going to benefit from the turn back in distance, and I like the way he's training into this. I kind of view him as the horse to beat in my handicapping of this race.
Yeah, he would be my second choice in this race. And I kind of look at it as if the Belmont never happened and he didn't run in that race. He may very well be the morning line favorite in here coming off that third in the Kentucky Derby. And I think he had some excuses. As you say, it was in the Belmont. It was a premature move. He was wide. I would really wish we had Trackus numbers. If you compared him to Arcangelo, who beat him by 2¼ lengths, I would imagine he ran much more than 2½ lengths extra distance. And he was up pretty close to what is fractions all color coded in red. So I think he draws a good post here. We have him shown last in the pace projector, which I think it's a little cloudy beyond the 4 horse, who I do think will be the clear leader, as all of these have some tactical speed. A horse like Angel of Empire is getting his races without blinkers lumped in. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's not up closer and not last in here. And I expect him to run a very good race.
Yeah, Angel of Empire is my pick in this race, and the way I'm thinking about it, Craig, with the concerns about Saudi Crown getting the distance, I don't think that Florent Geroux is going to go and open up 5 on this field. I mean, they're probably going to try to back down the pace as much as possible, so it's going to be a bunched field, and I just view Angel of Empire as probably getting a trip that's a lot more similar to the one that he got in the Arkansas Derby, where he wasn't that far off the pace and was able to make that big run around the 3/8 pole, and he's got that long, sustained move that you can make a better use of in a small field and potentially get some separation on a field coming to the quarter pole. And I just feel like it's a better situation for Angel of Empire than he's faced in his past couple of starts. But if I'm going to consider him, Craig, I've got to also take a look at Hit Show, who got a very similar trip to Angel of Empire in the Belmont Stakes. I mean, he wasn't quite as wide around the turns. He was one position inside of Angel of Empire, but he also was kind of under the gun from the half-mile pole home, and a mile and a half. I'm not convinced that that's really the best distance for him. He could be the biggest price in this field, and it's not like he's impossible to win this race.
No, for sure. And outside the Belmont, which I think you covered, I thought his Derby was actually really good. He was up close to the pace, a lot closer than the horses who finished in front of him outside of 2 fills. And I thought he ran well to only be beaten 6 lengths that day. And he kind of backed up that form in the Belmont. So I think he's dangerous as well. Like I said at the top, none of these would really surprise me. And the reason I said I was kind of against Forte is literally every horse in this field has run faster speed figures than him. So that's not really a horse that I want to take at what's going to be a short price. And that leads me to Disarm as well, who I don't particularly like him in here. I think it's a little bit too big of a step up in class. He did finish in front of Hit Show in the Kentucky Derby, but he also had a better trip, being much farther off the pace. He ran fine. I just, of the two, I would prefer Hit Show. But even his Matt Winn, I think that was pretty good. I mean, the horse he beat Verifying, he's not at this level, but he did go on to win the Kentucky Derby, and Matt Winn was able to run him down in the slop despite fractions that we have coded in blue in Timeform US. His speed figure was actually knocked down a few points that day. So while he's probably not for me in here, I might still find a way to use him as a C-type because I don't think he's totally impossible either.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people liking Disarm in this race. Personally, I don't really get it. Like you, I thought he got a pretty good trip in the Kentucky Derby. He ran well in that race, to be sure, and he's clearly a horse that's been improving throughout his 3-year-old season. But the Matt Winn last time, to me, it was just a weaker race coming into this than the Belmont Stakes or even the Dwyer, which came up so fast. I mean, Verifying is okay, but he came back to regress from a speed figure standpoint in his next start, as did Bo Cruz, who was just, I think, a no-show in the Iowa Derby. So I've got some concerns and questions about the legitimacy of that Matt win from a speed figure and quality standpoint. And Disarm, I mean, I won't be surprised when he gets a big piece of this, but he's just one that, especially if he drifts down a little bit from that 6-1 morning line, which it feels like he could, just based on some of the conversation around this race, he's a horse that I kind of view as the least likely winner, so I would need a bigger price on him. Let's move on to race 11. It's a 5.5 furlong turf sprint for the New York breds. This one going for the N1X allowance condition. And we've got a large field signed on, Craig, fully subscribed. We've got 11 runners entered for turf. It's a pretty wide open affair. This is another race where I just had a difficult time establishing a morning line favorite. I mean, I guess a horse like the number 9, Active Congress, could take some money because, I mean, she's just obviously a turf sprinter and she really likes these shorter races. Turning back to 5.5 furlongs is only going to benefit her because she likes to go fast every step of the way. I feel like she's been beating weaker horses, though, and this is a step up, even though it's against New York-bred competition from open company races. These are often a little tougher than the claiming and starter allowance races that you see. And also, there's other speed in this race that she has to deal with, especially in the form of the number 11, Bunty Windermere, who is really fast.
Yeah, I don't like Active Congress in this spot. Maybe I'd be more tempted if she was 6-1 on the morning line. But I suspect she's going to take money just like you did, particularly with Jose Ortiz riding. But I can't get past the fact that this is a pretty big jump up in class, even for state breds. That 40,000 claiming race at Pimlico is just okay. And in both of those races, she had clear early leads, was never really challenged. At Belmont at 6, she got a little tired late, but had everything her own way early on. And it's really hard for me to see that developing, particularly with the speed to her outside, maybe even the long shot on the inside, who we have shown on the front. If she takes to the turf, which she ran okay on it the first time with a fast pace figure, I think circumstances are going to be a lot different in here. So I'm not interested at all of Active Congress. She won't be on my tickets. Before we get into all the horses, I wanted to get your take on a horse who I just don't know what to do with, because it almost seems like a trick is being played to me with the number 5, Fancy Pants Juliana. Her first 2 starts on turf were really good. She ran 90 speed figures. I believe was she 2 or 3 then? She was just a 2-year-old. Yeah. Uh, so with any kind of improvement this year, it would seem like she would kind of tower over this field. But then they shipped her to Finger Lakes. She broke her maiden on dirt. They tried her in a stake. She ran really bad speed figures. She comes back to the turf, changes barns. And she gets Irad Ortiz. So for me, it's just a horse I don't know what to do with. I would like her a lot normally, and I feel like I want to like her in this spot. I'm just very leery. There's so much going on with her.
Yeah, she's a horse that's kind of difficult to wrap your head around. Her turf races I thought were okay. I wouldn't say I love those efforts, especially the one at Aqueduct in September. It's a race that when you go back and watch it, I mean, the comment line bumped 4.5. I mean, it was very minor. She got a really good trip in that race, just stalking on the rail, and I thought she just had very little finish that day. Watching that race, I kind of thought to myself, she might want longer because she's just kind of that one pace type that doesn't have the turn of foot. So, I mean, the speed figures are fine, and, with routine improvement, as you said, she could be effective here, but it is a little weird that they would even bother running her in those dirt races at Finger Lakes, and she was with Jeremiah Engelhardt. It seems like this owner has gone through a few stables since then. I don't know how long she's been in the David Donk barn because there are no workouts showing since her last race. So I don't know what to make of it. And with Irad taking the mount for, these connections, given the optics, I wouldn't be surprised when a lot of people end up landing on this horse, and maybe even she vies for favoritism. And there are just too many questions for me to want to take any kind of short price on her. So I was sort of looking elsewhere for horses that I thought would be better prices. I mean, Craig, the number 8, Busy Morning, is the horse that I made my top pick in this race, and I just think she makes a ton of sense in this spot. The one concern is that, well, I should say two concerns. I mean, she ran very poorly to end her 2022 campaign. I mean, it seemed like something went wrong because it's not like September is the end of the turf season. They could have run her on turf a couple more times in October and November, and she just disappeared. So maybe she had a setback with the reason why she ran so poorly that day. Jorge Abreu does not have good numbers coming back off of layoffs, so that's a bit of a concern for me. Though she ran really well in some races last year, especially her second and third starts. I mean, she earned speed figures that arguably make her the horse to beat in here. I mean, they've tried to go a mile with her a couple times. I really do think that shorter is better for this horse, and I'm a little bit less concerned about the layoff because I've been watching video of her last couple of workouts, and she looks like she's really training well. I mean, she's been in company with some lesser experienced horses, but has just looked superior to the horses that she's been working with, really traveling well, especially in those turf works. And I'm expecting that she's coming back pretty live in this spot, and I don't know how short a price she's going to be.
I like her as well. I didn't quite get to making her my top pick, but you covered it. My one concern really is the layoff numbers for Jorge Abreu, but there's a lot to like as well, so I have no problem with her. The horse I eventually landed on was a horse just to her inside, Carrie, who has been running pretty steady speed figures. She broke her, she didn't, she ran her debut this year was an allowance race at Tampa, which came back surprisingly strong. Even though she only got a 94 speed figure that day, it's a race where a couple horses who finished behind her have come back to win on turf, improving their speed figures by 10 and 20 points. Unfortunately, the winner hasn't run back yet, but it's a race. It was the only turf sprint that day, and it's a kind I could easily underrate for young, lightly raced 3-year-old fillies in the spring, or even I think it was still winter back then. I don't remember. Sometime in March. But it's a number that I think could be better. They tried her in a stake that was pretty tough last time against good 3-year-olds. Going long, she led, kind of packed it in. It seems like to me this 5.5 furlong distance might just be perfect for her, and I'm expecting a jump up. I love that Luis Saez is on. He's pretty aggressive. I think he can get a good spot from the post, and she's just a horse I like a lot in this spot that's going to add some value too, I think.
Yep, I've got her in the mix, and I really have no argument with what you said, Craig. I think it makes a lot of sense. There are a couple of horses turning back in distance in this race that I want to touch upon. I generally try to be careful with turnbacks in these turf sprints because it's pretty significant to go from a mile and a 16th all the way back to 5.5 furlongs. It can take a different kind of horse. But the number 3, Snowy Evening, she has sprinted effectively in the past, going as short as 6, or actually she even was second, going 5 furlongs in her debut at Belmont as a 2-year-old. So it does seem like she's got a lot of versatility, and a mile and an eighth in her last couple of starts, that might have actually even been a little bit far for her. It seems like there's plenty of speed signed on in this race with Queen's Dancer, Act of Congress, Bunty Windermere. So if this race holds together as drawn, it feels like a pace that could come apart. And we've seen closers have a fair chance in these 5.5 furlong turf sprints at Saratoga. So I think Snowy Evening makes a lot of sense in this race. And I'm even going to throw the number 6 Saratoga Chrome into the mix at a big price. She does not have the sprint form, but what I will say about her is when you watch her on track or if you see her prior races, she has a very keyed up, headstrong horse at times. She can get a little washy before her races, and just one that seems to have a short fuse. And sometimes those types that can be a little bit too headstrong, turning back can help them a little bit. She didn't run well last time, but she also, was in a tough spot. I think that was a stronger N1X than this one, and now she's second off the layoff. I think this Jeff Hiles barn is really sharp. I mean, they've been sending out some sneaky live runners at this meet, and he's a trainer that, if you look him up in Formulator, has a significantly high positive ROI with all starters over the past 5 years. And Saratoga Chrome just feels like one that's going to fly under the radar here and could be running late if this pace fell.
Yeah, I could see that. I got the impression her last race was strictly a prep race, probably especially once she drew the 12 post where she had very little chance on the inner turf. She's coming right back in just 2 weeks, so she's going to be value. And if it gets hot up front, which it very well could, no issue with her. I have her on my tickets. Snowy Evening, I could see the short price kind of turned me off a little bit on her, but I could use her on my backups.
Let's move on to the finale on this Saturday card, race 12. It's a maiden special weight event on the inner turf course, going a mile and 3/8 for the fillies and mares. And, Craig, this is one where we've got a few that have tried the distance before and run okay. A lot of them are stretching out. Some lightly raced horses, a few that have had more chances. In these situations, I generally try to lean more towards those that appear to have the upside or a little more lightly raced. And, looking at it through that lens, I guess horses like Towerette and She's Mo Bubbly are probably the ones to beat in this spot. Towerette hasn't quite gone this far yet, but she did handle a mile and a quarter last time and was actually finishing pretty well at the end of that race. So feels like one that Christophe Clement has kind of been gradually stretching her out, but always thinking these longer distances will be for her. And then She's Mo Bubbly. I mean, she handled a mile and 3/8 last time, was closing well at the end. She's a little bit of a one pace type, and she does have Irad Ortiz on here, so I think that's going to drive down the price even further. But I mean, there are horses that haven't necessarily disappointed too many times yet.
I agree. In these races, I generally tend to go with the horses who have run at least close to the mile and a 3/8. The stretch out from a mile or a mile and a 16th can be pretty daunting, particularly for horses earlier in their career. So I'm with you. I kind of stuck with She's Mo Bubbly, Towerette. Is that how you said that? No need to answer. But I would avoid a horse like Libretto, who has run fine at a mile and quarter, mile and 3/8, but she's had 11 chances. She's one that just doesn't seem to have a whole lot of speed, doesn't have a whole lot of finishing kick. She's just a plotter. So, as one that takes some money and has done okay at the distance, I'd be against her.
Yeah, we're on the same page there. I much prefer Towerette. I don't know if that's how you say it, but that's how I'm saying it. And She's Mo Bubbly, as opposed to a horse like Libretto, who has handled the distances for Mike Maker better than she did for Jorge Abreu, but just feels like a horse that's already had the chances at this level. I want to bring up another horse, Craig, that is my top pick here, and one that I really like in this spot, and I was kind of hoping that she'd show up in a race like this at Saratoga after seeing her at Belmont, and that's the number 9 Fizzy. And when you look at her debut on paper, I know it doesn't look like much, but it's a race that you really have to watch the entire replay because she had some trouble in the early stages, just seemed like she was shuffled back and steadied on the back stretch to the point that she was towards the back of the pack early. And it just seemed like Irad Ortiz didn't really ride her with a lot of urgency. He just seemed content to just sort of sit in traffic towards the back for much of the way. Seemed like she had some running up her stretch, but he just took a long time ever getting her out into the clear. And when he finally angled her out in the lane about the 8th pole, and she started to run just as they came across the wire. And if you watch the gallop out, he actually rides her through after the wire into the clubhouse turn to the point where she passes the entire field and goes out way ahead. Optically, it looked like they were intentionally prepping this horse. And, given the fact that she's by Taprit, there's stamina on the dam side. She's a half sister to a horse named Tesoro, who is best as a turf synth router. And just feels like one that Todd Pletcher maybe had in the back of his mind. This horse probably wants to go longer next time. There'll be these races coming up at Saratoga. And I think the fact that Irad is off her and now landing on She's Mo Bubbly instead for the same barn is going to ensure that she's at least a fair enough price. But, with the switch to Flavian Pratt, I wouldn't be surprised if this horse is much more aggressively ridden in this spot, especially from the outside post. So she's one that I like a lot in this race, and I'm hoping to get somewhere around that 5-1 morning line.
You can't see it, but I'm giving myself a pat on the back for not mentioning this horse because I was pretty sure this is where you're going to land. And I have no argument with you. I didn't quite get to making her the top pick. I will probably stick with Towerette, but she will definitely be pretty prominent on my tickets for all the reasons you said. I'm rarely one that pays attention to gallop outs, but hers was very noticeably good. It was hard not to notice if you stuck around and you watch on the replay and just see her flying by the other. So no issues at all with Fizzy. And I'm with you. I think it's when you can go from Irad Ortiz to Flavian Prad, I think it's pretty neutral move. Maybe some might prefer Irad a little bit, but at the window, you're going to get the benefit. That far outweighs any difference in ability.
Yeah, I mean, I like Fizzy a lot in this spot. I'll just mention a couple of other big prices, or I don't know if they're going to be big prices, but I mean, the number 10 Sri Lanka. I mean, I don't like the post, but I don't have a big knock on her form in Kentucky and in Gulfstream. I mean, she's run fine in her races. I mean, she has finished second three times. But Brendan Walsh has really come out firing so far at this meet, so I don't want to totally discount her. And the number one Southampton Dock is a horse that I could use like a C in this race because I mean, she just feels like one that hasn't maybe been in the best spot so far. I mean, I don't know what they were doing sprinting this horse to start her career because she's got a pedigree that says, run me as long as possible. And it seems like she has gradually improved as the distances have stretched out. I mean, she ran okay going a mile and a quarter on the dirt last time as an English Channel out of a Kitten's Joy mare, a dam that, did go longer distances on the turf. And she's getting a big rider upgrade to Jose Ortiz. I don't know if she's going to be good enough to beat a field of this quality, but she feels like a horse that's kind of just finally getting into a spot where she's actually supposed to be successful.
Yeah, she's one I'd be more interested in for verticals just because of the lower speed figures, but you can only use so many. It kind of depends on my ticket if I would put her on as a backup or not, because I can see it. The breeding certainly points to 11 furlongs.
Well, Craig, I think that takes us to the end of the handicapping portion. We already sort of talked about ticket structure and a few of the races going through this, but we can kind of, circle back through this pick five sequence, talk a little bit about how we might attack it. I'll let you start, and I think we already, kind of mentioned our similar strategies in the Vanderbilt, but, take us through after
Yeah,
that.
I'm just going to use those two horses, probably an equal strength. I wouldn't know how to split up a ticket 60-40, so just sticking with the most obvious horses there. In the ninth race, for me, No Show Sammy is fine. I think that horse is going to improve a bit. I'm not totally against expand the map just because of the speed figures, so I would use those two. And Candle, I wasn't totally against either. I don't like Spurgey in this race, and I don't like Diamond Head either. Yourhurst Boulevie, who you like, that I could find putting her on my tickets as well. She did improve on the turf here in the state second time out, and there could be some pace to set up as well. In the Jim Dandy, like I said, I could use lots of horses in here in just a 5-horse field. I'm going to key on Saudi Crown. He would be my only A horse. As backups, I would probably use Angel of Empire and Hit Show. I'm definitely not using Forte, and doubtful I would use Disarm. It would just kind of depend how my ticket broke out, but I think his races and his figures are probably a little bit phony. So most of the play on, not most, but A, Saudi Crown, and B, Hit Show and Angel of Empire. In that allowance race, I didn't know what to do with Fancy Pants Juliana. You kind of helped me make up my mind. Not going to use her at all. I really like Carrie in this spot. I like the turn back for her since she does have sprint success for before. Particularly that race at Tampa where at just 5 furlongs, I thought she ran well. I think that figure might very well be underrated, and 5.5 would be good for her. Busy morning, I'm fine with too. I think the Jorge Abreu stats you have to worry about a little bit, but everything else points to this horse running a big race at 5.5, which is as short as she's gone. You mentioned a few others, and I could see them like Snowy Evening, Saratoga Chrome. They would be more like backups for me. And then in the 12th, I'm just keeping it the 3 horses, Towerette, Fizzy for sure, and She's Mo Bubbly. That would be it. Just those 3 for me.
Yeah, we've got some similarities here. Like, Craig and I have similar views of the Vanderbilt. I'll maybe press Gunite a little bit, but using both him and Elite Power in that ninth race. I do like Bolivia. She'd be an A for me. I probably may get your kicks an A as well. Given that she's probably going to be the better price of the 2 Chad Brown trainees. I won't be shocked if No Show Sammy Joe or Expand the Map win, but there are horses that I would probably relegate to B or C status in this sequence. In the Jim Dandy, Angel of Empire would be my A. I really do think he is the most likely winner of this race. I would use Hit Show as a backup. I just think he's going to be the right kind of price in terms of value. And I could even use Saudi Crown as a backup. Forte is a horse that I feel like can win this race, but he's just not going to be good value. And I think there's going to be benefit to trying to beat him in a sequence like the pick 5. So he's one that I'd be more inclined to leave out. In that 11th race, Busy Morning would probably be the A for me. I feel pretty good about her showing up in this spot. And then beyond her, I could use a bunch of others. I mean, Saratoga Chrome is my price, but I agree with what Craig said on Kerry. I'd use Snowy Evening. I mean, they seem like all horses that I would use as Bs in this spot. And I would probably actually, as I speak about it, probably try to get through the race using those 4, breaking them up in that way, because I had a little trouble warming up to some of the others, especially those that were going to be forwardly placed. And then closing it out, I like Fizzy. She was my best bet when I put my picks in on this Saturday card. She'll be my A in this spot. And then the backups that I would use would be Tolerwet and She's Mo Bubbly, obviously, but also the number 1 Southampton Dock. I'd throw her in as a B or a C because I just think she's a little bit interesting, maybe a better horse than her recent form makes it look. So that takes us through to the end of this Pick 5 sequence, Craig, and hopefully we gave out some good ideas. We'll be back, I believe, early next week to do a recap. I think you're just doing one podcast with me next week, Craig. Correct me if I don't have that correct, but I'm expecting to have a guest on the forecast when next week rolls around.
You have it correct. I'll be here for the recap on Tuesday, but I will be out of town on Friday, so not able to do the forecast. Not that I couldn't, but kind of like the spot you're in now at Saratoga. Hopefully this is the end of your work and you can enjoy more of your time there at the spot. Unfortunately, I'm not going to get to go this year, but it's always one of my favorite times when I can, and hope you're having fun.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Spending this week up in Saratoga. I'll be up again in the middle of August. I mean, it's always a tough time when you want to, spend time at the racetrack, having fun, enjoying the races, and there's a lot of work to do. Craig and I were just talking about this offline, but it's always great to be in Saratoga, and I'm especially excited to take in some of these big races coming up on Saturday. Well, everybody, thanks for tuning into the podcast this week. Remember, you can always catch these on drf.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever get your podcast. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, thanks for tuning in, and make sure to catch that Timeform US Pacecast coming up early next week.